She sold the empire's greatest treasure for 3 small coins. Louise was a poor girl who only wanted to bury her mother. Her mother left her a pearl that belonged to the royal family. A ruthless prince was hunting for that very same pearl. He tracked the treasure and bought the entire shop. Louise hid by taking a job in a lonely castle. The nobleman there was secretly working for the prince. He found the proof that she sold the royal treasure. Years ago, the prince promised to make Louise his bride. Now the nobleman smiled and held her hand very tightly. Louise had no idea her life was already over. In a world torn by imperial conflict, an isolated wooden lodge sits deep in the snowy mountains. A pack of predatory wolves prowls outside the building in the freezing wilderness where the rightful heir is currently hiding. Inside the lodge, Crown Prince Caius, the master of the empire, sits alone on the wooden floor. He shivers in the biting cold, wrapping his coat tightly around himself as a clattering sound rings out from the shadows. Caius flinches as a sudden rumbling sound vibrates through the floorboards. He is clearly on edge, hiding away from a world that has turned against his bloodline. Looking anxious, Caius wonders when his nanny will finally come back. It is way past the date she promised to return, and he starts to realize that something must have gone wrong. Caius hides underneath the wooden stairs, peering through the gaps as the wind whooshes outside. He quietly calls out for his nanny, hoping she is near. Outside, a tall man wearing a heavy coat walks determinedly through the deep snow. This unnamed supporter is heading straight for the prince's hiding spot. The man reaches the building, and the heavy wooden door swings open with a loud creak. Caius springs up from his hiding spot on the floor, looking hopeful for a second. He calls out for Elisabeth Amalie Ermolli, thinking his nanny has finally returned to save him. Instead, the tall man stands towering over the young boy. He looks down at the prince and tells him that he has finally found his imperial highness. Caius falters, as his hope turns into pure fear. He stammers, asking the stranger who on earth he is. The tall man kneels respectfully on the floorboards to show his unwavering loyalty. He says he is there to pay his respects to Crown Prince Caius, the master of the empire. Caius immediately asks if his nanny was the one who sent him to this remote location. The man looks serious as he delivers the crushing news. He reports that Marquis and Marquise Ermolli have betrayed the prince and told the usurper, Emperor Karl, exactly where the mountain lodge and the prince's supporters are located. Caius is horrified, unable to believe his nanny betrayed him to his uncle. He stammers that it is impossible and demands to know who this man is and why he is telling such lies about the woman who raised him. The supporter grabs Caius by the shoulders and tells him to pull himself together. He says there is no time to question the truth because their supporters have already been attacked and the imperial army is already searching the mountain. He insists the prince must flee immediately. Caius is left in absolute shock. His eyes wide with disbelief, he can only whisper to himself, questioning if Elisabeth really betrayed him after everything they have been through together. Caius refuses to believe the betrayal, insisting she promised to come and rescue him from this nightmare. Suddenly, a loud bang interrupts his thoughts, signaling that their time has run out. The man looks back over his shoulder in alarm as the situation turns critical. He curses, realizing the enemy has already closed in on their position much faster than expected, leaving them with almost no escape. The unnamed supporter turns back to Crown Prince Caius with intense urgency. He asks the boy where the Pearl of Albrecht is, knowing the heirloom is the key to his survival. Caius looks down, his voice heavy with sorrow. He admits that he entrusted the pearl to his nanny, Elisabeth Amalie Ermolli, in the desperate hope that she would return to him alive. The man shakes the prince in a fit of anger, asking how he could act so recklessly. He can't believe the boy would entrust an imperial heirloom to a mere noble. He warns the boy that Emperor Karl is desperate to eliminate him, because he is the rightful heir. The man makes it clear that their enemies are closing in. The supporter explains that the pearl left by the late majesty is the prince's only way to survive. He insists they must find it before it falls into the emperor's hands. The glowing pearl of Albrecht radiates light. This legendary heirloom is the only thing that can secure the prince's future and the safety of the empire, but now it is missing. A vast, snow-covered mountain range stretches across the horizon. This remote landscape is far removed from the intense political struggles of the capital, serving as a place of exile. In the remote Melk region, the Ermolli residence sits nestled in the deep snow. This modest house is where the remnants of a once noble family have been living in exile. Elisabeth lies dead in her bed as a neighbor named Nina speaks to her daughter, Louise Ermolli. Nina says she is sorry about the loss, but reminds her that the living must go on, especially since a church funeral is so expensive. Nina suggests asking Viscount Ingle for assistance, but Louise admits she already feels bad about imposing on him. She doesn't want to be a burden to the man any more than she already has. Nina tells Louise that she is simply too kind for her own good. She worries that the girl's selfless nature will only make her difficult life even harder. The deceased woman is identified as Elisabeth, the wife of the former Marquis Stephen Rothschild Ermolli. Her death marks the end of an era for the struggling family. Louise sits quietly, clutching a handkerchief. She reflects on how her mother passed away just last night, leaving her to face the world and their mounting debts alone. Nina suddenly hands Louise a small pouch of money. Louise is completely surprised by the gesture and asks her friend what the cash is for, knowing how much Nina's family struggles too. Nina tells her to use it for the funeral. She notes that even if Louise can't afford a full burial, the money should at least cover the costs of a cremation. Louise apologizes for being a burden, but Nina tells her to stop. She suggests Louise think of the money as payment for teaching her own daughter how to read. Nina walks out, telling Louise not to suffer alone and to let her know once she makes a decision. The door clacks shut, leaving Louise alone with her thoughts. Louise sits in the quiet room, feeling grateful to Nina. However, she thinks to herself that she really doesn't want to cremate her mother, wishing she could afford a proper burial. Louise Ermolli holds the small cloth bundle. Her mind racing through her dire financial situation, she realizes that every bit of money she earned was drained by her mother's medical expenses, leaving her with a pathetic savings of barely 1 crown. In a flashback, Elisabeth Amalie Ermolli holds the bundle with trembling hands. She tells her daughter to keep the item close and take good care of it, treating it as if it were a physical part of her own being. Elisabeth reveals the shimmering pearl of Albrecht hidden inside the cloth. She gives Louise specific instructions to take the jewel and act only when the crown prince finally ascends to the throne. Louise lets out a small, bitter scoff at the irony of her circumstances. Louise sits alone by the window. She thinks about how she never expected typical motherly last words, like being happy or staying healthy, but she really believed her mother would at least show some worry about leaving her all alone in the world. The story moves to the following day in the area of downtown Helden. Louise makes her way to a local pawnshop, known as the Draw Shop. Inside the shop, the pawnshop owner examines the Pearl of Albrecht. After a careful look, he tells Louise that he can only offer her a loan of 3 crowns for the piece. Louise is completely stunned by the low offer. She asks if that is really all she can get, even though she is only pawning it and not selling it outright. The owner dismisses her shock, claiming that this is simply how all pawnshops operate. The owner passes a contract across the counter. He explains that the price would be different if she were selling, but since she is just borrowing money, the terms are stricter. He adds that Baroque pearls are not in high demand lately, so he is actually being generous by offering 3 crowns. He tells her that once she makes up her mind, she just needs to sign the document right there. She becomes nervous while looking at the pearl. The pressure of the decision is clearly getting to her. Louise starts doing the math in her head. She knows she needs at least 10 crowns to give her mother a proper burial in the church cemetery. If she pawns the pearl for 3 crowns, she will still be short. She remembers her time tutoring the 2 young women. It was a stable job, and she hopes that relationship will save her now. She leans over the counter and picks up the quill pen, officially signing the pawnshop document. As time passes in the city, Louise sets her resolve. She plans to work as hard as possible to save money, pay back the 3 crowns, and reclaim the pearl. Her first step is to go see the Viscount early tomorrow morning. That night at the Berg estate, the gears of a dangerous plan begin to turn as the shadows deepen over the massive grounds. A crow caws as it flies over the sprawling grounds toward the main building, its dark wings cutting through the night air. Inside, the pawnshop owner is terrified and practically groveling. He apologizes for any disrespect and explains he only tried to hold onto the pearl because he thought buying it outright would be too difficult. He tells the men that the girl who brought it in has no idea how valuable it is. He is confident he can get her to sell if they pay him 10 times the original amount. Crown Prince Caius sits back and asks how exactly the man plans to renegotiate that deal. Michael stands by while his master questions the greedy owner. The owner starts sweating and says he knows her address. He suggests they just go and threaten her, since she is a young woman living all by herself. Caius smokes his cigar and asks why they should even bother with such trashy, underhanded methods. He decides to just buy the entire Helden pawnshop instead. That includes the pearl and the loan certificate Louise signed. He tells the man to hand over Louise Henriette Ermolli's address immediately, his gaze turning cold and sharp. The owner quickly agrees to do whatever he is told. It turns out, Louise only got a measly 3 crowns for the treasure. It is almost insulting that she pawned such a priceless pearl for a mere 3 crowns, showing just how desperate she really was. Caius thinks about Elisabeth and how she disobeyed his order to return to him alive. He feels she failed to stay loyal to him in the end. He tells Michael that he has finally gotten his hands on the pearl after all this time. He orders Michael to proceed with the plan they already discussed without any further delay. The goal is simple: bring the Ermolli girl to Berg along with the pearl. While he plots her capture, Louise is exhausted and sleeping at her desk. The next morning at the Engel estate, the maid is panicking. She asks Louise what is going to happen now that Viscount Engel was taken by the police last night. One of the daughters asks if her father is okay. Louise looks at Warris and Irene, feeling sick to her stomach. She thinks this is the worst possible time for this to happen, and has a really bad feeling. A door creaks open and someone announces that Louise has arrived, interrupting the somber moment. One of the girls cries out for her brother and asks Louise if their father has really been detained, her face covered in tears. Lord Pietro enters the room and explains that the investigation is still ongoing, so the authorities cannot give them any specific details yet. Pietro tells Louise Ermolli he is sorry about her mother and promises to pray she goes to a better place. Louise thanks him, but immediately asks what is going to happen with the Viscount now. Pietro says drugs were detected in the wine shipped from their winery. He calls whoever did it a lunatic for messing with products meant for export and insists there must be a mistake. Louise tells him the Viscount will be back soon, so he should not worry, and Pietro thanks her. Louise decides she should probably go home for the day. She realizes she cannot just wait around at the estate until the Viscount returns. Louise wonders what she is supposed to do now since she has nowhere else to turn for help. As she leaves, Louise thinks that even though it is winter, she cannot keep her mother at home any longer. Louise walks through the woods and asks herself if selling the pearl is really the only option she has left. Louise trudges through the snow as she approaches her small wooden house. Louise notices her front door is open and gets confused. She is certain she locked it when she left earlier. Louise rushes inside the house in a panic, calling out for her mother. Louise stops when she sees that the floorboards have been violently torn open. Louise realizes the intruders ransacked everything, including the floor hiding spot. She starts panicking because her entire fortune was kept in there, and now she has nothing left to her name. Louise fumbles around inside the dark, empty hidden compartment in the floorboards. Louise sees that the precious gold coins she spent years saving are completely gone. She realizes that all of her hard work and the money she needed for the burial is lost. Louise kneels on the floor in absolute despair as the reality of her situation sets in. Tears begin to drip down onto the dark wooden floorboards. Louise blames herself for the theft. She thinks she should have kept her valuables close to her at all times instead of hiding them in the floor. Louise thinks about how she tried to sell the pearl despite her mother's dying wish. She believes this theft is God punishing her for her betrayal. Louise kneels in her empty house and cries bitterly over everything she has lost. Louise Ermolli is struggling to cope in her isolated home when her neighbor Nina stops by. Nina enters and asks if she is finally starting to feel any better after everything that has happened. Louise sits on the couch, looking completely exhausted. She greets her friend with a weak hello, her voice barely carrying any energy as she acknowledges Nina's arrival. Nina sets a paper bag down with a plop and expresses her worry. She points out, the funeral was ages ago, yet Louise has spent 3 whole days eating nothing but watery porridge. Louise looks toward the bag, but her mind is elsewhere. She asks if Nina managed to bring the newspaper she had requested, showing that she is looking for something specific. Nina hands over the newspaper, hoping it has the information her friend needs. She notes that unlike illiterate folks, Louise actually has the advantage of knowing how to read. As she opens the newspaper, Louise reflects on her dire situation. She thinks about how she lost her mother, her fortune, and her job all at the same time. Nina points out a specific crest in an advertisement, asking if it looks familiar. Louise remembers that just before passing away, her mother regained consciousness to leave her with a dying wish. Louise stares at the page in shock. She recognizes the symbol immediately, realizing this might be the opportunity she needs to fulfill her mother's final request. The advertisement states that the Margrave of Berg is seeking a live in governess. It mentions the position is for women only, offers excellent compensation, and prefers someone with a noble background. The notice instructs applicants to send a letter of introduction to the provided address. This is the first step required to schedule an interview for the prestigious position. Nina excitedly smacks Louise on the back, identifying the Berg family crest. She tells her it is a perfect opportunity and urges her to apply for the job right away. Nina asks if Louise is really from a high noble family, given the ad's preferences. Louise looks at the paper, considering the reality of working as a live-in governess. Michael, the Margrave of Berg, leads his private army on horseback. He is a count whose primary duty is defending the empire's borders from external threats. Michael's power has grown significantly since the current emperor took the throne. Louise wonders if they would accept an application from a fallen family that supported the previous ruler. She looks at the newspaper with a worried expression, hesitating as she weighs the risks. She knows her family's past political ties could make this a dangerous move. Louise looks at the small box on her lap and reaffirms her goal. She thinks about how she must fulfill her mother's dying wish regardless of the potential consequences. She decides she has already lost everything and has no reason to hesitate. As she stands up suddenly, Nina calls out her name in surprise at the sudden movement. The wooden chair rattles against the floor as Louise rises with clear purpose. She is done grieving and is ready to take action to complete her mission. Louise Henriette Ermolli sits at her desk as she finishes her application. She reminds herself that she has survived much more desperate times than this, and is ready to take the risk. She signs the letter with her full name. It strikes her as strange that she has had to write her full name twice today, first on a promissory note at the pawnshop, and now on this application. Holding the finished letter, she steels her resolve. She tells herself that whatever happens from here on out, she will do everything within her power to succeed. As she looks out at the landscape, her focus remains on the future. Her only goal is to one day fulfill her mother's dying wish regarding the pearl. A week passes by quickly, and the story moves to the Berg estate. The grand building sits isolated under the morning sun. Louise has arrived at the estate and sits waiting in a luxurious reception room. Her single trunk sits beside her as she waits for someone to receive her. She rubs her sore feet, thinking about how a full day trapped in a carriage has left her toes aching. Despite the physical toll, she is just relieved that the acceptance letter arrived so quickly. A sudden knock at the door interrupts her thoughts. She admits to herself that she honestly did not even expect to be accepted for the position in the first place. The door creaks open and Verena Berger, the head housekeeper, enters the room. She introduces herself and asks if Louise is the teacher who applied for the governess position. Louise stands up immediately to greet the housekeeper, introducing herself. Verena seems taken aback by the name, letting out a surprised "Oh, Louise" as she processes the introduction. Verena looks her over with a knowing expression, asking if she is indeed the same Ermolli that she is thinking of. The housekeeper clearly recognizes the disgraced noble name. Louise confirms that it is most likely the family she is thinking of. She realizes that any servant working for a high noble family would know exactly how the Ermolli family fell from grace. She hands over a letter of introduction to Verena to prove her qualifications. She mentions that she recently spent time teaching two sisters at Viscount Engel's estate. Louise asks what the young lady she will be teaching is like. Verena is vague, telling her that she will find out for herself once they meet in person. Verena adds that the young lady is extremely introverted and never leaves her room. She bluntly tells Louise that she does not actually expect her to be able to teach the girl well. As Miriam sits alone with her collection of seashells, Verena notes that it does not really matter anyway. According to her, every governess they hire ends up quitting before long. The sun begins to set over the estate. Verena points out that Berg is a very isolated place, far removed from the rest of society. Verena explains the family history, noting that the elderly Margrave has been retired from active duty for quite some time now due to his failing health. She explains that the Margrave's son, Michael, has been acting in his father's stead for several years. Even though he has not officially inherited the title yet, everyone publicly refers to him as the Margrave. As they walk through the halls, Verena explains that because the current Margrave is still unmarried, the responsibility of raising the underage young lady has fallen entirely on her. Verena explains that they had to post a public advertisement because the previous teacher suddenly fell ill and returned home. She notes that normally they do not allow outsiders into the estate, making this a rare exception for Louise Henriette Ermolli to be there. Verena knocks on the door 3 times, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. She calls out for Lady Miriam, trying to get a response from the girl hidden away inside the room. There is only silence coming from the other side of the door. Verena and Louise wait patiently, but no sound or movement indicates that the girl heard them or intends to answer. Verena says the girl probably heard her but just chooses not to respond. Louise asks how old the young lady is, trying to get a better sense of the student she is supposed to be teaching. Verena explains that Miriam just turned 14 recently, but she is no different from an 8-year-old child. It seems the girl is much younger mentally than her actual age, which explains her introverted behavior. Louise asks if Verena will allow her to go inside the room. The housekeeper looks surprised by the request, as if she did not expect the new teacher to be so bold right away. Verena tells her that from now on, this is her job as the teacher. She says Louise does not even need her permission to enter the room anymore, handing over the full responsibility of the girl. Verena wishes her good luck and leaves her alone at the door. Louise stands there, preparing herself for whatever is waiting on the other side of the heavy wooden entrance. Louise feels like the housekeeper has been looking down on her too blatantly since they met. She knows she is from a fallen noble family, but the obvious disrespect still makes her feel upset. She sighs and decides to just put up with it for now. Since she has to keep seeing the woman around the estate anyway, she resolves to just endure the treatment and focus on her work. Louise knocks on the door herself this time. She asks if Miriam is in there, hoping that a more direct approach from her might get a different result than the housekeeper had. She introduces herself as Louise, the new teacher. She asks if Miriam would mind if she came in to introduce herself properly, keeping her voice soft and non-threatening. Again, there is no sound from inside the room. Louise stands in the hallway, met with total silence as she waits for any sign that the girl is listening to her. She realizes that Miriam probably has no intention of listening to her at all. It is exactly what she expected after hearing about how many other teachers had already quit. Louise leans against the door and tells Miriam she probably does not want to see anyone, so she should just listen. She mentions she came from a small territory called Melk, and her legs hurt from walking all day. She sits on the floor, asking for it to be their little secret. She says that sitting like this is a secret even from her late mother. She is trying to build some kind of rapport with the girl through the closed door by sharing something personal. Louise looks out at the window and notices the sky is turning red. She thinks to herself that the sun must be getting ready to set soon, marking the end of her first day. A memory of the flames that consumed her mother flashes through her mind. Suddenly, the door handle creaks as someone starts to open it from the inside, snapping her back to the present. Louise flinches in surprise as the door moves. She calls out for Miriam, wondering if the girl is finally going to show herself after hearing her talk through the door for so long. Miriam peeks through the door and asks if this is her new teacher. Louise thinks the girl is adorable, like a talking doll. She confirms she is the new teacher and tells the girl to call her Miss Louise. Miriam hesitates before asking if Louise also does not have a mother. Louise admits her mother passed away just last month. Miriam flinches and offers her sincere apologies. Louise smiles and says she will be okay if Miriam comforts her. The two of them stand together in the center of the room. Louise spots something that catches her attention. She notices a collection of seashells on the table and wonders about them. Miriam suddenly rushes to the table and declares the shells are her treasure, warning Louise that she cannot take them. Louise apologizes and explains she only looked because they were so pretty. Miriam looks away shyly. Louise Henriette Ermolli introduces herself formally with a curtsy. Miriam begins to fidget, struggling to find her own words in response. A notebook slides across the table, filled with the name Miriam von Brong, written over and over again. Louise compliments the beautiful handwriting. Miriam blushes and admits she practiced 100 times to avoid making any mistakes. A sudden knock at the door sends Miriam into a state of terror. Miriam dives under the table to hide while Louise looks around in confusion. Louise sits on the floor near the girl as a voice from the hallway asks if she has finished her greetings. A maid enters and announces that the master has invited Louise to dinner. Louise asks if she means His Excellency, but the maid tells her there is no need to be so formal. Louise Henriette Ermolli apologizes to the maid, who is terrified that the head maid will dock her pay if she finds out about their interaction. Louise turns to Lady Miriam and asks if they should go to dinner together. Miriam gasps in total shock, asking if she really means her. Miriam starts trembling and backing away, struggling to speak. Louise watches her with concern, wondering if this extreme reaction means something specific about the girl's past. The maid interrupts to clarify that His Excellency specifically only asked for Louise to join him, leaving Miriam behind. Louise listens silently to the instruction. Louise looks back at Miriam with a soft expression, admitting it is a shame they have to part ways since they only just met. As she prepares to leave the room, Louise tells Miriam she will see her tomorrow. The young lady watches her go from her spot on the floor. The sun begins to set over the massive Berg estate, casting long shadows across the towers and grounds as the day transitions into evening. Louise stands with the maid before the towering dining room doors. A voice from inside calls out, asking them to come in. Louise enters the grand room and looks surprised as a man's voice addresses her, acknowledging that she is the new teacher. Margrave Michael sits at the head of a long, fancily set dining table. He tells Louise to come sit and make herself comfortable since it is just the two of them. Louise realizes this is the young master she was told about. A servant pulls out a chair for Louise as she takes her seat. Michael watches her every move with a sharp glance from across the table. Even though she only just met the Margrave today, Louise thinks to herself that she can already see exactly why Miriam is so scared of him. Michael notes that she is the only teacher who has managed to look after his sister for hours without a single incident on the very first day. Louise looks back at him, feeling the pressure of his gaze. While holding a glass of wine, Michael promises that her compensation will be generous, given the child's special circumstances. Louise looks down, wondering if the Margrave avoids his own sister simply because she is not considered normal by society's standards. She tells herself not to make hasty judgments even if things feel off, wondering what happened here before her arrival. Michael then realizes he forgot to formally introduce himself. He takes a sip of his wine and introduces himself as Caius von Berg, the lord of the estate and Miriam's older brother. Louise introduces herself in return, giving her full name as Louise Henriette Ermolli, while the Margrave listens intently. Michael smirks and repeats her surname, noting that the Ermollis were a noble family purged for supporting the previous emperor. Louise is visibly shocked that he knows her history so well. Michael asks if she resents her parents, pointing out that she once had a fertile estate and lived in a grand mansion in the capital before everything was taken away. Louise Henriette Ermolli explains to Margrave Michael that she was born right after the current emperor took the throne. Since she was never a noble for even a moment, she asks how she could possibly feel resentful or wronged by the past. Michael taps his glass and suggests that perhaps her parents changed their political stance just to save the child in the womb. Michael stares intensely at her and points out that the Ermollis are actually the only supporters of the previous emperor who managed to survive. Louise begins to tremble as the weight of his words hits her. She wonders to herself how being loyal to the emperor her parents served could ever be considered a crime. Louise continues eating her meal and tells Michael that she was so young at the time that she doesn't remember anything that happened back then. Louise reflects on how she is already bearing responsibility for events that occurred before she was even born. She adds that the parents she knew weren't particularly political people. Louise explains that despite their fall from grace, her mother made sure she received a noble education. She promises to do her absolute best to teach Lady Miriam if he entrusts the girl to her. Michael looks down at the table and tells her that he isn't worried about her ability to teach his sister. Michael smiles and extends a hand, telling Louise to feel free to come find him anytime if she ever needs anything. Michael addresses her as Miss Louise. She is immediately struck by the way he says her name, finding it unusual. Louise wonders why it feels so different when Michael addresses her that way, especially since it is no different from how everyone else calls her. Louise resolves to eat well and take care of herself for Miriam's sake. Across the table, Michael remains serious and silent. In a flashback, Elisabeth Ermolli lies sick in bed and reminds a young Louise that she is an Ermolli and Heidenberg's foremost vassal. Elisabeth tells her never to forget the family name, even if she wears a shabby cotton dress. Louise wonders what she can actually do for the Ermolli name while she is barely treading water. Back in the present, Louise is fast asleep in her bed at the Berg estate. A sudden loud bang echoes through the room, causing Louise to wake up gasping in shock. Louise sits up in bed, jolted by the noise. She wonders if she just heard gunfire nearby. More loud bangs ring out as Louise rushes to the window to see what is happening outside. Louise looks out at the empty garden and assumes it must be military training, since this is the Margrave's territory. Suddenly, there is a knock at her door. Maid Pauline Price enters the room carrying a basin. She asks Louise if she slept well and offers to bring her breakfast. Louise Henriette Ermolli, the new governess, asks the maid who Lady Miriam usually eats with. Pauline Price, the maid, explains that the young lady typically eats all alone in her room. It is a lonely existence for a child in such a massive estate. Pauline Price officially introduces herself and tells Louise to let her know if she ever needs any small errands done around the house. She seems eager to help the new governess settle into her role at the Berg estate. Louise thanks Pauline and mentions that she saw her yesterday. She thinks to herself that the maid seems like such a sweet and good girl, feeling a bit of relief to have a friendly face around. Suddenly, a massive bang echoes through the room, catching both women completely off guard. The sudden noise is jarring and interrupts the morning routine. Pauline explains that the master, Margrave Michael, really enjoys hunting and rarely sleeps. She warns Louise that she will often hear gunshots starting from dawn and tells her she will just have to get used to it. Louise realizes that the constant gunfire from Michael's hunting trips is exactly why Miriam is so terrified of loud noises. It is a harsh environment for a timid young girl to grow up in. Louise tells Pauline that she is going to take Miriam down to the dining room for a change. Pauline is happy to help and promises to have everything ready for them immediately. Louise thinks to herself that she really needs to check on Miriam's condition. She also realizes this is a good chance to learn more about the mysterious Berg estate while she is there. Sitting down to a meal of fresh morning shrimp, Louise remembers how much her mother loved seafood too. It is a bittersweet moment of reflection as she starts her day. Miriam starts fidgeting nervously at the table next to her. Louise watches her and thinks to herself that she should probably start their lessons by teaching the girl some proper table manners. Louise remembers a conversation she had with Pauline earlier. She starts piecing together why the household seems so understaffed when it comes to looking after the young lady. In a flashback, Louise asks Pauline if Miriam has a personal maid since she noticed the girl was all alone yesterday. Pauline admits that the girl does not have one right now. Pauline explains that Miriam actually did have a personal maid, but the woman decided to leave along with the previous tutor when they went home. It seems nobody stays for very long. Louise remembers the visual of the previous staff members walking away with their suitcases. It is clear that being a governess or a maid in this house is a difficult job. Pauline tells her that the rest of the staff has been taking turns looking after Miriam for several days now. The poor girl has not had any consistent care lately. Louise watches Miriam eat and thinks about how hard it must be for her. The girl is already timid and shy, yet her entire world changed overnight. Louise asks Miriam if they should start studying together tomorrow. The suggestion causes the young girl to flinch, showing just how anxious she is about the new arrangement. Miriam continues to fidget while eating a breadstick, completely ignoring the question. Louise thinks to herself that the girl is just pretending she did not hear her to avoid answering. Louise explains that studying is not just about reading boring books, but also includes drawing and playing the piano. Miriam is surprised and repeats the word piano with genuine curiosity. Lady Miriam nibbles on a piece of bread and mentions that it is noisy, so her brother would hate it. She seems to be constantly thinking about his preferences, even when he is not around. Louise Henriette Ermolli tells the girl not to worry about that. She suggests they can practice when Margrave Michael goes hunting. Just as they are talking, a door creaks open, interrupting their conversation. Michael enters the room, causing Miriam to flinch in surprise. He ignores his sister's reaction and focuses on Louise, noting that there she is. Michael stands in the doorway, looking directly at the new governess. He asks her if she slept well last night. Louise stands up and shields Miriam. She stammers out a greeting, saying that thanks to him, she slept comfortably and thanks him for his consideration. Michael notes that it seems he has interrupted something. Michael explains that he actually came to find her because there's something he would like to show her. He ignores the tension in the room. Michael steps forward into the room while carrying a dead, bloody white fox he just caught during his hunt. Miriam flinches and squeaks in terror at the sight of the carcass. Louise stammers as she looks at the dead animal, her voice trailing off in shock. Michael says he was lucky enough to catch a silver fox. He tells Louise that this silver fur would suit her hair color perfectly, ignoring her obvious discomfort. Michael asks if he should have a shawl made for her as a memento. Louise looks at him, horrified by the bloody gift he is offering. Louise tells him that fur is excessive for her and that his words alone are enough. Michael smirks and tells her it would be warmer than the thin clothes she has right now. Louise grips her dress tightly. She explains that what she is wearing is a keepsake from her mother and promises to wear something more appropriate next time. Michael tells her it would not be so bad to become a lady befitting his estate. He reminds her that in Berg, she must follow Berg's rules if she wants to stay. Michael walks out of the room, still carrying the bloody fox. Louise watches him leave, left alone after the unsettling encounter. Louise stands in the quiet room while Miriam hides behind her back. A heavy thud echoes through the hallway as the door finally closes. Miriam clutches Louise's dress and mutters that she does not like her brother. The girl is terrified of him. Louise holds Miriam's shoulders to comfort her. She tells the girl that her brother is just a bit more taciturn than others and points out that he even placed a very large job advertisement in the newspaper just to find her a teacher. Miriam looks up and asks if that is really true. Louise smiles and promises to bring the newspaper as proof later to show her. Louise looks down at the drops of blood left on the floor. She wonders if the ad was placed out of genuine concern for his sister, especially since he left without even glancing at Miriam. Michael stands alone at a window, smoking a cigar while staring out at the estate, seemingly lost in his own thoughts. Louise Henriette Ermolli is out in the garden talking with an older gardener among the yellow roses. Margrave, Michael watches her from a distance, thinking to himself that she is truly adaptive, perhaps because she is an Ermolli. Michael lets out a heavy sigh while holding his cigar. He reconsiders his previous thought, wondering if he should instead say that Louise is just thick, skinned for how well she is fitting in. Michael stands by his desk and tells the person to come in. A voice from the other side of the door announces that he is there to give a report to His Excellency. A black-haired subordinate wearing a blue uniform enters the room. He stops in front of the desk and bows respectfully with his hand over his chest. The subordinate reports that they inspected Louise's luggage and found nothing unusual, though she did bring her mother's urn with her. Michael says that actually works out well and orders him to proceed with the rest of the plan. The subordinate lingers after receiving his orders, staring at the Margrave. Michael notices the hesitation and asks if he has something else he wants to say. The subordinate finally speaks up, asking if Michael is really going to go through with marrying Louise. Michael lets out a puff of smoke and asks why it bothers the man to visit the house now that he thinks of Louise as the woman His Excellency is going to marry. The subordinate quickly bows his head, admitting he overstepped his bounds. He promises to carry out the orders, and Michael tells him that he is dismissed. Michael looks out the window again at the garden. He thinks to himself that Louise looks much better when she is smiling so cluelessly about the situation she is in. Louise smiles while holding a large bouquet of yellow roses. This is the one other keepsake that her mother, Elisabeth, left behind for her. In a flashback to years ago, a young crown Prince Caius sits at a table with Elisabeth. He asks her when the baby is coming, and she tells him it might be as early as next month. Young Caius smiles at her across the table. He reminds Elisabeth that she once told him he was the most precious thing in the world to her. Caius then asks if she can give him the baby too. Elisabeth wonders if His Highness needs a younger sibling, but the boy immediately says he does not want a sibling at all. Caius makes a bold vow, declaring that if the child is a boy, he will make him his vassal. But if it is a girl, he will make her his bride. Elisabeth laughs, saying that would be the greatest honor for the Ermolli family. Caius smiles brightly and promises that she can definitely trust him to follow through on his vow. Louise Henriette Ermolli and Lady Miriam sit together on a couch as Louise reads a newspaper advertisement. The ad states that the Margrave of Berg is seeking a live, in governess. It promises excellent compensation and mentions that a noble background is preferred for the position. Miriam asks if Louise is a noble, since the advertisement mentioned it as a preference. Louise confirms that her parents were nobles, which technically gives her the background the Margrave was looking for when he posted the job. Miriam notes that a noble's daughter is still a noble. She reveals her last teacher told her that even though she is slow and stupid, her status as a noble remains her most important and defining quality. Louise is shocked by the insult and asks who would say something so cruel to a child. Miriam explains it was her last teacher, a woman named Miss Zara, who had been in charge of her education before Louise arrived. Louise looks at Miriam seriously and tells her that noble status does not last forever. She insists that who a person is on the inside matters much more than any title or noble background they might hold. Miriam looks down at the newspaper and thoughtfully repeats the phrase about who she is on the inside, clearly considering Louise's words for the first time in her life. Louise clarifies that Miriam should be valued as herself, not just as the daughter or sister of the Margrave. Miriam hesitates and brings up her father's very different views on the importance of their family name. Miriam admits her father told her the Berg family name is far more important than someone like her. It is clear she has been raised to feel like a burden to her family rather than a person of worth. Miriam grips the newspaper tightly as she processes this new idea. She wonders if she might actually be important as an individual, rather than just a tool to maintain the family's noble reputation. Louise smiles gently and says she wants to be a good person. She promises she will not say mean things or do anything to hurt others, setting a new example for Miriam to follow. Louise reaches out and holds Miriam's hand to comfort her. She tells the girl that wanting to be a good person is a wonderful thought and something they can both strive for. Louise suggests that they should start working on that goal together beginning tomorrow, marking the start of a new chapter in Miriam's education and their growing bond. Later that night, Margrave Michael is busy writing at his desk in his private office. When he hears a knock at the door, he tells the visitor to come in without looking up from his work. Louise enters the room and asks if His Excellency has a moment to speak with her, her voice sounding hesitant in the quiet, dimly lit office. Michael remains at his desk, focused on his documents as Louise approaches him. The room is filled with the sound of his pen scratching against paper as he finishes his current task. Michael asks what brings her to a man's room alone at such a late hour. Louise is startled by the implication and stammers that is not the reason she came to see him. Louise explains she is there to ask a favor regarding Miriam. Michael smirks and asks if his sister has already caused some kind of trouble on her very first day. Louise says no and explains she wants to read books to Miriam, so she needs permission to access the library. She mentions the head butler told her she had to seek His Excellency's permission for such a request. Michael taps his hand on the desk and complains about the old man making unnecessary trouble for him by sending Louise to his office for something so minor. Margrave Michael stands in his office and tells Louise Henriette Ermolli that the library is right next door. He offers to show it to her while they are already discussing her request to read to his sister. Michael leads the way out of the office. The large double doors of the library begin to open with a loud creak and a clack as they enter the new room. Louise looks amazed at the sight of the massive library. She cannot help but let out a wow as she takes in the scale of the private collection. Michael gestures toward the massive room and notes that she must really love books. He tells her to look around as much as she likes to find what she needs. Louise looks around excitedly and remarks that the place seems 10 times bigger than the Melk library she used to visit. She thinks that with this many books, there must be some storybooks hidden somewhere. Louise crouches down to examine the lower bookshelves, but finds that this section only has Domus language and other foreign language books. She realizes it is all history and asks herself if there is no literature here at all. Michael appears closely behind her and asks if she is looking for something specific. The sudden voice, right behind her, makes Louise jump and let out an eek in surprise. Louise falls backward onto the floor in shock. She stammers out his title, and Michael looks down at her, saying he did not mean to startle her so badly. Michael reaches out and grabs her wrist to help her back onto her feet. He offers his apologies for the sudden scare while pulling her up. Michael helps her stand up and asks if she is hurt from the fall. Louise says she is fine and apologizes, explaining she was just startled to suddenly hear his voice while she was focused on the books. Michael smiles slightly at her reaction. He asks if he is really that forgettable that his presence would shock her so much. Louise looks flustered and insists that is not the case at all. She apologizes for her unseemly behavior before Michael asks what specific book she is looking for. Louise explains she was looking for storybooks that might interest Lady Miriam. She asks if there are any books in the collection that he used to read when he was a child. Michael looks serious and explains that, contrary to what she might think, he did not spend his childhood reading storybooks. He reveals his father lacked such generosity and put a hunting rifle in his hands instead. Michael tells her that if she needs storybooks for his sister, he will get her as many as she wants. He seems willing to support her efforts to teach Miriam. Michael remarks that her mother would scold her if she saw her acting this way. Louise looks surprised and asks for a pardon, not understanding what he means. Michael leans in close and tells her she is supposed to look into the other person's eyes when having a conversation. He demonstrates by looking directly at her, and Louise admits he is right. Michael stands back with his hands behind his back. He tells her he will be careful from now on, ending their late-night meeting in the library. The massive Berg estate stands silent under the dark night sky, its towers looming over the grounds. Margrave Michael walks through the moonlit corridors, his footsteps echoing through the quiet halls as he heads toward the library. Michael carries a stack of books, noting that Martin delivered the storybooks only 2 days after he asked for them. He decides to leave them in the library, certain that Louise will eventually find them on her own, and the door creaks open as he enters. He finds Louise Henriette Ermolli fast asleep at one of the desks, surrounded by heavy volumes she was studying. Michael flinches in surprise, not expecting to find the new governess still in the library in the middle of the night. He stands there silently, observing Louise as she sleeps peacefully, unaware of his presence. Michael tightly squeezes the books in his hands, frustrated as he wonders why she is even there. He thinks about how she claimed to have received a noble education. He questions if she ever learned that a woman should not be sleeping alone in random places so late at night. Michael looks down at her with a complicated expression. his internal conflict evident as he watches her sleep. He notices the titles she was studying: History of the Heirs Empire Volume 1 and Heidelberg Imperial Family Genealogy. He thinks to himself that she is utterly lacking because she was not properly educated. Michael reflects on her family name, thinking she only puts on a shabby noble act learned through words. He coldly concludes that for a child, a mother traded for a prince's life, she is worthless. Despite his harsh thoughts, Michael sets a storybook titled Catsy the Cat Fairy onto the desk with a quiet thud. The next morning, bright sunlight streams through the large library windows, signaling the start of a new day. Louise finally wakes up, blinking her eyes as she slowly realizes where she is. She springs up from the desk in a total panic, wondering what she was thinking and worrying that someone might have seen her sleeping there. As she gathers her things, Louise stops and notices something new sitting on the desk. She spots the stack of storybooks, specifically the one titled Catsy the Cat Fairy, and wonders why they are there. Louise picks up the book and looks around the empty library, questioning who could have left these here for her to find. Louise Henriette Ermolli sits with Lady Miriam at a white grand piano to begin their lesson for the day. She is determined to help the young girl improve her musical skills despite the tense environment of the estate. Louise plays a melody while Miriam watches her hands intently, trying to pick up the proper technique and rhythm. The girl seems focused on every movement her teacher makes. Louise claps enthusiastically and tells Miriam that her rhythm has improved significantly since yesterday. She is genuinely impressed by how much progress the girl has made in such a short time. Miriam blushes and admits she practiced this morning. Louise finds her adorable and praises her hard work before suggesting they transition to reading a book together. Now, Miriam suddenly bolts from the piano and flees the room. Louise is left sitting there in surprise, realizing the girl has fled at the mere mention of reading. Louise holds up a storybook and wonders how the previous tutor taught Miriam, since she hates reading so much. She tries to entice her back by asking her to look at an adorable cat illustration. Miriam peeks out from behind a curtain, her interest piqued by the mention of a cat. She asks if there really is a cat in the book. Louise shows Miriam the book and explains her brother gave it to her as a gift. Miriam is shocked and asks if it is really hers. Louise confirms it and suggests reading just 2 pages before they draw cats together. Miriam holds the book carefully and confesses that she has never actually seen a real cat before. The revelation highlights how sheltered her life has been at the estate. Louise is surprised by Miriam's confession and suddenly gets an idea that might motivate her student even further. Louise asks Miriam if she would like to go into town later to see a real cat at the general store. Miriam is thrilled and asks if she can really go there too. Louise says Margrave Michael might allow the trip if she studies hard and promises to ask him for her. Miriam immediately becomes determined and says she will read the book right now. Miriam is so eager she pats the sofa for Louise to sit down. Louise giggles, thinking about how this is the same girl who used to run away at the sight of books. Louise sits with Miriam and says she will read first. Then Miriam should follow along out loud. Miriam agrees and prepares to start their lesson. Louise begins reading the story about a miller calling his 3 sons to him. However, she thinks to herself that she knew she should not have been reading in that particular spot. Louise stands alone later, looking distressed as she realizes she fell asleep while reading in the library. She worries about who might have seen her in such an unprofessional state. Louise looks at the ceiling and thinks to herself that of all times, Michael had to come by exactly when she dozed off. She is frustrated by her own lapse in composure. Head butler Martin appears in the hallway and informs Louise that the master must have left the books there for her. His calm presence only adds to her internal panic. Martin explains he delivered the books to Michael last night and he was quite prompt. Louise is stunned, wondering if His Excellency personally brought them to her while she was unconscious. Louise Henriette Ermolli wonders why Margrave Michael would personally come and leave the books for her. She recalls him groaning in annoyance and saying "good grief" while she was asleep on the library desk. She realizes she cannot even make excuses for dozing off since she stayed up for 2 nights straight preparing lesson materials. Louise tells head butler Martin that she wants to thank the Margrave and asks if he is currently in his office. Martin informs her that he is unavailable because, starting today, he will be away for 3 days on a territory inspection. Louise reads a story to Lady Miriam about an owner who left his entire fortune to his 3 sons before passing away. She thinks to herself that since Michael granted her request for books, she should go see him. She plans to ask him to let Miriam go outside as well. While looking out the window, Louise wonders how Michael will tease her the next time they meet. The weight of her mission regarding the Pearl of Albrecht remains on her mind as the sun sets over the Berg estate. Louise walks through the hallway carrying a book and humming a cheerful tune to herself. She seems to be in a better mood after her successful lesson with Miriam and the progress they have made together. Louise is suddenly startled when she hears the sharp voice of headmaid Verena asking if they really call this clean. She stops in her tracks and looks around to see the headmaid speaking with such a harsh tone. Verena is busy scolding the maids, telling them that since the master returns today, there should not be a single speck of dust anywhere. Louise hides around the corner, annoyed that the headmaid is right in front of her room. Louise looks at Verena's stern face and thinks that she would like to get along with her. However, she realizes it is difficult to approach her because the headmaid has been dismissive of her from the very start. Louise decides that just this once, she will pretend she did not see Verena and try to slip past. She slinks by the cleaning crew, figuring the headmaid probably does not want to acknowledge her presence either. Her plan to sneak past fails immediately when Verena calls out her name. Louise flinches in surprise and stops walking, realizing she has been spotted despite her best efforts to remain unnoticed. Verena comments that Louise must really love books to be reading while she walks. She warns her to be careful, because the staff is currently mopping the floors, making the hallway quite slippery. Louise gives a nervous smile and thanks Verena for her concern. However, she thinks to herself that she never expected the headmaid to call her out just to mock her for her reading habits. Verena adds that the master has requested to dine with Louise tonight. This news catches her completely off guard, and she can only manage to ask what, in total shock at the sudden invitation. Verena tells her she had better head to the dining room before she is late. As Louise walks away, she wonders why Michael keeps inviting her to join him for meals lately. At the dining table, Michael notes that the Ermollis are the only survivors among the previous emperor's supporters. Louise wonders if something related to her family has happened to make him bring up their political history now. Michael stands up and personally pours a drink into Louise's glass. The gesture is surprisingly formal, adding to the tense and uncertain atmosphere of their private dinner together. Louise glances at Michael, thinking that he clearly called her here because he has something to say. She is confused because the meal is almost over. Yet he has not said a single word about his actual intentions. Margrave Michael sets his glass down with a clink. He tells Louise Henriette Ermolli that he actually called her there because he wanted to ask her something. Michael explains that not long after Helden became part of Berg's territory, a tax evasion issue came up. He says they conducted surprise inspections of several shops in town and discovered something quite interesting. Michael slides a document across the table toward Louise. He notes that her name was written on it and asks if it belongs to her. Louise reacts with shock as she sees the paper. Louise realizes it is the pawn ticket for the Pearl of Albrecht, the very one that was stolen from her. Her name is clearly signed at the bottom of the document. Louise stammers, asking how he could have possibly found it. Michael explains it was suspicious that the shop had both the loan certificate and the pawn ticket, so he looked into it more carefully and found the truth. Michael reveals that the pawnshop owner actually staged the whole robbery by pretending to be a thief. Louise is stunned, realizing the man she trusted was the one who robbed her. Louise bows her head deeply and thanks Michael sincerely. She tells him the pearl is one of the few precious keepsakes she has left from her mother. Louise admits she had no money for the funeral and had no choice but to pawn her mother's belongings. She says she thought she would never see the ticket again and promises to repay the debt in any way she can if he returns it. Michael repeats her offer back to her. Michael asks if he ever actually said he would return the ticket to her. Louise is completely caught off guard and asks him to pardon her confusion. Michael picks up the ticket and says there is something else he wants to ask of her. He admits it is a difficult request and that it took him a while to finally bring it up. Louise gulps nervously and asks what the request is. She tells him that as long as it is not illegal, she is willing to do anything to get her mother's keepsake back. Michael gives her a warm smile, clearly satisfied with her response. Michael looks her in the eye and tells her to marry him. Louise can only react in absolute shock at the sudden proposal. Michael asks if she does not want to marry him based on her stunned expression. Louise stammers that she would not dare refuse, but she just thought she must have misheard him. Michael explains that the situation is not as complicated as she thinks. He notes that his only blood relative is his inadequate sister, Miriam Berg. So he is the only one left to inherit the House of Berg. Michael says he is simply asking her to help him avoid being pestered by his father about marriage any longer. Louise is distressed, wondering how he can suggest such a thing. Louise clenches her fists in her lap. She thinks there is no way his father would ever approve of him marrying someone like her. Margrave Michael Berg asks if he should have her permission first before anything else. He tells her that getting his father's approval is his own concern, so she does not need to worry about that part of the situation at all. Michael casually asks if she has someone she is already interested in. He tells her that as long as she does not plan on committing bigamy, he really does not care, and she can even keep seeing them if she wants. Louise says she is going to pretend she did not hear anything he just said. Michael stands up from the table, and the chair makes a loud clatter as he moves away. Louise, Henriette Ermolli, warns him that he will regret this tomorrow anyway. Michael just asks if he can propose again, if it turns out he does not regret it by tomorrow morning. Michael tells her that if she gives him a specific date for when she will accept, he will save the actual proposal for that time. He lets out a small laugh as he finishes his thought. Louise is left standing there, looking completely flushed and distressed by his relentless and bizarre behavior. Louise announces that she will be going now and makes a quick exit. The sound of her leaving echoes through the room as she hurries away from the table. Michael looks down at the document signed by Louise and muses to himself. He notes that even though she said the item was precious, she gave it up surprisingly easily. Sitting alone at the massive table full of food, Michael wonders just how long she will be able to keep refusing his offer. The next morning at the estate, Louise is already awake and standing by her window. She looks out at the grounds while still dressed in her white nightgown. Down in the courtyard, Michael is preparing for the day. He stands with a servant who is holding a large black horse ready for him to ride. Louise watches him from her window, thinking about how she could not sleep a wink last night because of the proposal. Michael notices her and looks up with a smile. She can still hear his voice telling her to marry him. Louise feels like she is trapped in a meticulously crafted script where she has no choice but to eventually accept. Louise wonders why he did not just marry the former tutor if marriage was really that urgent. She keeps asking herself why he specifically chose her for this. Michael just gives another gentle smile from below, seemingly amused by the whole situation. Louise is completely mortified and covers her mouth, letting out a frustrated groan as she realizes he is still watching her. She quickly ducks behind the curtain, surprised that he actually noticed she was watching him. Her heart is thumping loudly against her chest from the sudden interaction. A sudden knock at the door makes her jump. Louise stammers out for whoever it is to come in while she tries to compose herself. The maid, Pauline Priest, bursts into the room carrying a huge basket of flowers. She excitedly tells Louise to look at them, announcing that the master sent them. Louise is baffled and asks what all of this is and why he would even send her flowers. A servant rolling in a cart full of gift boxes tells her that it does not even end there. Pauline Price shows Louise Henriette Ermolli a rare silver fox fur shawl and matching boots. Pauline mentions how incredibly hard these items are to get, clearly impressed by the gesture. Louise just stands there, likely overwhelmed by the sudden influx of expensive gifts from a man who was just threatening her. Louise is visibly shaken as she looks at the fur. She stammers out a question, asking if this is the same fox that Michael hunted recently. The memory of him holding that bloody carcass is clearly fresh in her mind, making this gift feel more like a threat than a romantic gesture. Pauline happily confirms that it is indeed the fox from the hunt. She continues to gush over the shawl, mentioning that in all her time working at the estate, she has never seen Michael give such a precious and expensive gift to anyone on the staff before. Louise tries to keep her composure and thanks Pauline for bringing everything up. She notes that the fur and boots must have been quite heavy to carry all this way, trying to shift the focus away from her own growing anxiety about Michael's sudden change in behavior. When Louise flinches at the touch of the fur, Pauline notices her hesitation immediately. The maid looks a bit concerned and asks if she actually dislikes the gift. It is clear that Pauline sees this as a dream come true, while Louise sees it as a trap. Louise admits that she is not sure if she should even accept such an extravagant gift from Michael. She feels the weight of the obligation it creates, but Pauline tries to reassure her by saying the Margrave has dozens of fox furs just like this one lying around. Pauline then lifts a small brown box, explaining that Michael specifically instructed for this to be given to her as well. Louise gulps in anticipation, terrified that the box might contain jewelry or something even more permanent that would bind her to the estate and his proposal. Turns out it is just handmade chocolate from the head chef. Pauline jokingly asks if she is disappointed that it is not jewelry, but Louise is still shocked. She knows that handmade chocolate is incredibly expensive and another sign that Michael is pulling out all the stops. Pauline is convinced that Michael must really like her to be doing all of this. Louise thinks there is absolutely no way that is true, but she goes ahead and opens the box anyway. The chocolates inside look perfect, but they only add to her growing suspicion. Inside the box, Louise finds a small note card. She reads the message, which says that Michael is looking forward to this evening. It is a clear reminder that the gifts are just a prelude to their scheduled dinner, where he likely expects an answer. Michael is off on his own, thinking about how it would not be so bad for Louise to become a lady that fits his estate. He is firm on the idea that once she is part of the family, she will have to follow the rules of Berg. Louise stands by the window, still clutching the chocolate box. She knows that someone as arrogant as Michael does not just change their entire personality overnight. She is not falling for the charm offensive and remains on high guard about his true intentions. As she watches Michael outside with his horse, Louise is certain that he must have some other hidden motive for this marriage proposal. She refuses to believe this is about affection and is determined to figure out what he is actually planning behind the scenes. Later, Louise sits with Miriam for a reading lesson. The young girl is working through a book called The Blue Bird, but she stumbles over the word magpies, calling them megpies instead. She immediately flinches, as if expecting a harsh correction or punishment for the mistake. Miriam starts rubbing her leg nervously, a habit that Louise has noticed before. The girl stammers out an apology for her mistake, looking completely terrified over a simple mispronunciation. It is a heartbreaking display of how much pressure she feels to be perfect. Louise quickly steps in to comfort her, telling her that it is perfectly okay to make mistakes and encouraging her to keep going. Miriam seems a bit relieved by the gentle response and quietly agrees to continue the lesson, though she is still clearly on edge. Miriam gets back to the story, reading about how two magpies flew into a sack and were caught when a string was pulled. She is trying her best to focus on the words, but the underlying tension from her earlier mistake still lingers in the room. Louise watches Miriam's hand as she continues to rub her thigh anxiously. She thinks it is great that the girl is finally interested in books, but the constant rubbing and the way she keeps checking Louise's reaction suggests she developed some very bad habits before she arrived. Louise is deeply concerned about the girl's behavior. She has tried asking if something happened in the past to make her this way, but Miriam refuses to give her a straight answer. The silence only confirms that there is a deep-seated trauma Louise needs to uncover. Louise realizes that for now, there is really no way for her to help Miriam with whatever is haunting her. She feels a wave of pity for the poor girl, knowing she is trapped in this cold estate with a brother who terrifies her. Miriam hesitates during her lesson and calls out to Louise Henriette Ermolli. Louise asks if there is a specific word she does not know, but Miriam quietly says no. Miriam looks up and asks if they can go see the cat if she manages to finish the book. Miriam worries her brother will not allow it because she is too embarrassing to go outside. Louise is shocked and tells her she is pretty and lovely, but Miriam mentions that Miss Zara told her otherwise. Louise smiles and tells her that going out is a reward she can earn by working hard, so she should not worry about it. Miriam asks if she just needs to finish the current book. Louise clarifies that she has to finish all 3 books her brother provided. Miriam agrees to finish them all because Louise does not scold her harshly, and she really wants to see the cat. Louise realizes that Miriam has had no one to rely on, trapped between a strict father, a scary brother, and a mean governess. Louise pulls Miriam into a hug and tells her she worked so hard today and is truly wonderful. Miriam is caught off guard by the sudden warmth and affection. As they sit together on the sofa, Louise thinks that if Miriam is okay with someone like her, she wants to stay by her side. Louise decides she wants to do everything she possibly can for Miriam. Later that evening, the scene moves to the dining room where meat is being sliced during dinner. Margrave Michael asks Louise if she is protesting because she does not like the gift he gave her. Louise says it is not that, but the item is so valuable it seems like too much for her to wear. Michael asks if that is really the reason. Michael mentions her mother's keepsake and suggests she is not actually that desperate to get the promissory note back. Louise snaps back that the item was hers to begin with and asks if he is really going to claim a stolen item belongs to him. Michael taps his glass and asks if it is really so difficult to marry as a formality just to deceive his father. Louise asks why it has to be her and wonders if he would have proposed to Miriam's former teacher if she had stayed. Michael laughs and tells Louise that she can be pretty clueless sometimes. Louise Henriette Ermolli is completely flushed with shock. She thinks the whole proposal is absurd, especially since she was a married woman. The realization hits her hard as she processes the weight of his words. Margrave Michael squeezes his hands together on his lap. He points out that governesses are usually married women, after all, implying that her status fits his needs perfectly. Michael thinks to himself how foolish it is to assume that others are just like him. He seems to be operating on a completely different level of calculation than anyone else in the room. Michael explains that marrying someone of high noble status involves financial entanglements that he finds distasteful. He adds that he cannot marry a maid either, because a woman of low birth could never properly play the role of a countess. Michael looks directly at her and says she is right there before him. She is an Ermolli and a beautiful one at that. He asks why he should waste any more of his time looking further for a candidate. Louise asks if her being an Ermolli really means anything to him. She points out that it is a name that has already vanished from society and reminds him that the Bergs are a loyalist family. Michael rests his head on his hand and dismisses her concerns. He explains that aside from the early years of the emperor's reign, his house was active in appointing the former emperor's supporters. He says their two families coming together would symbolize reconciliation. Michael touches his chin and adds that her being an Ermolli holds great significance for him. He admits that if she were just Louise Muller, she would not be nearly as appealing to his interests. Michael rests his hands on the table and tells her she does not need to decide right away. He mentions his father would be delighted if she made up her mind quickly and reminds her she would benefit by getting her promissory note back. Louise looks down, feeling conflicted. She points out she has only been there for 10 days. Michael replies that marriage is not something decided in a single day and tells her she has nothing to lose. Louise thinks she is uneasy because she has nothing to begin with, but marrying just to avoid his father's nagging feels wrong. Louise speaks up and says she also has one favor to ask of him. She then corrects herself and says there are actually 2 things she wants to discuss. Michael looks intrigued by the shift in conversation. He asks if she really has 2 requests of her own, even though she will not grant his one request for marriage. Louise sits up straight and clarifies that it is not a personal request for herself. She explains that she is asking on behalf of Lady Miriam. Michael asks if she has already finished the books he gave her last time. Louise says not yet, but explains she wants to go on an outing with Miriam. When he asks what for, she says she wants to show the girl the cat from the fairy tale she recently read. Michael looks skeptical and asks if she really wants to go all the way outside just to see a cat. He reminds her that he told her to teach the child, not to indulge her every whim. Louise argues that Miriam is very interested in art. She explains that if they start with subjects the girl likes and work their way up, she believes Miriam will eventually grow closer to books and learning. Michael holds his glass and warns her that she has only seen Miriam's calm side lately. He says the girl is not well behaved or easy to manage outside and throws a fit whenever she sees guards, making protection difficult. Louise places a hand on her chest and insists a coachman will be enough. She promises to hold Miriam's hand tight and stay with her the entire time they are out. Michael drinks from his glass and agrees, but says he will send the guards along as well. He then asks what the other favor is that she wanted to ask for. Louise asks if they could possibly add walks to Miriam's schedule. Michael pauses as he holds the stem of his glass, considering the request. Louise Henriette Ermolli mentions her worry for Miriam's health, since the girl is always indoors. Margrave Michael agrees to the request, telling her to go ahead if that is what his sister wants. Michael warns her not to go beyond the western pond because the path leads to the hunting grounds, a place Miriam hates. Louise realizes that is where he goes every dawn. Michael pushes his chair back to leave and tells her to take his marriage request seriously. Michael slides past Louise, adding that if she is so concerned about Miriam, she should think about his offer. Michael leans in and kisses a strand of her hair, asking if becoming part of the family would really be such a bad idea. Louise is left completely flushed. Michael walks away while Louise slumps in her chair, stammering that she will think about the proposal some more. Michael thinks to himself that Louise seems to prefer looking after a pathetic little girl over taking her place as the lady of the house. Louise touches her hair where he kissed it, admitting to herself that she does not understand his behavior at all. Louise and Miriam finally head outside to the pond area where an easel is set up for their lesson. Miriam watches the goldfish and mentions that Verena told her their mother brought them from her homeland. Miriam points out that ducks usually fly to this spot when winter comes. Miriam explains that her brother finds the ducks noisy, so he catches them and feeds them to the wolves. Miriam notes that the ducks are actually much quieter than the sound of her brother's gunshots. Louise wonders if she made a mistake, worrying that the walk just stirred up bad memories for the girl. Louise tries to change the subject by suggesting they draw the cats, goldfish, or ducks since the weather is so nice. Miriam says she brought something specific to draw and shows a picture of the princess from her book. Louise tells Miriam that she is much prettier than the princess in the book and suggests she draw a princess that looks like herself. Miriam flinches in total horror at the suggestion, exclaiming that she is dirty. Louise is shocked by the outburst and grabs the girl's shoulders, firmly telling her that she is absolutely not dirty. Louise looks at Miriam and tells her she has eyes like the ocean and hair as bright as the Milky Way. Lady Miriam kneels on the grass and holds on to Louise Henriette Ermolli. She looks down shyly and admits that to her, Louise is even more beautiful than any princess in a book. Looking at the grand architecture of the Berg estate, Louise thinks about how a child as kind as Miriam should be cherished. She wonders why it seems like no one actually cares about her. As dusk settles over the estate, the street lamps begin to glow against the fading pink sky. Eventually, the sun disappears completely, leaving only a crescent moon hanging in the dark night. Louise reaches a large white door and pushes it open. The heavy wood creaks as she steps into the dimly lit room to see what has been left for her. On the table sits a light blue gift box and a bouquet of flowers. Louise sighs, noting that it had finally been quiet for a few days. But now, Michael has sent another gift. She lifts the box with both hands, feeling hesitant about the contents. Despite her reservations, she decides she should at least check what is inside out of courtesy. Inside the box is a dark blue morning dress with a high collar and lace details. A handwritten note is placed right on top of the fabric, waiting to be read. Michael is shown writing the note with a quill. He offers Louise a family plot in a sunny spot in Berg for her mother's funeral and hopes she stays warm. He signs it as Caius. Louise reads the note and realizes Michael prepared new mourning clothes specifically for her. The mention of a family plot for her mother catches her completely off guard. She holds up the winter mourning dress and realizes her current one is only for summer. She thinks about how Michael must have known her exact circumstances to prepare something so specific. Suddenly, a knock sounds at the door. Pauline Price leans in with a bright smile, excited to see that Louise is back and asking if she has checked the gift yet. Louise jumps in surprise at the sudden intrusion, calling out Pauline's name. The maid walks further into the room and asks why she hasn't tried the new dress on yet. Pauline tells her to try it on quickly because the master spent a long time preparing it. Louise is confused and wonders what Pauline means by him taking a long time. Pauline explains that Michael asked her to get clothes tailored in his stead. She suggested measuring the dress Louise brought with her to make sure the new one was the exact same size. Pauline starts pushing Louise toward the changing screen, telling her to hurry up and change. Louise stumbles forward, asking her to wait a moment. Pauline gets to work, pulling the laces tight on the back of the dark blue dress. She announces that she is all done with the fitting. Louise stands before the mirror in the perfectly fitted morning dress. Pauline is relieved, exclaiming that it fits her perfectly and expressing her relief. Louise touches her chest while looking at her reflection, wondering when Michael could have started preparing this. Pauline says it was likely around the first week she arrived at the estate. Pauline mentions that the master seems truly grateful to her. She knows that finding a new governess on such short notice was a significant burden for him. Louise Henriette Ermolli blushes as she looks away. Pauline Price notices the reaction and mentions that she seems to like this gift much better than the last one Michael gave her. Louise clenches the fabric of the new dress. She reflects on how she was never able to hold a proper funeral for her mother, which is why she could never bring herself to take her old mourning clothes off until now. Pauline looks at her with genuine sympathy. She tells Louise that she understands the pain of loss because her own father passed away a few years ago too. Pauline waves off the heavy mood and smiles. She explains that after her father died, she came to work at the estate, and now her whole family is doing well and never has to worry about going hungry. Pauline suddenly grabs the old summer morning dress and says she is going to wash it thoroughly. Louise is caught completely off guard by the sudden move and stammers in surprise. The door slams shut as Pauline hurries out with the laundry. Louise reaches out in a total panic because those old clothes were one of the few keepsakes she had left from her mother. She realizes she has already worn the new dress, so there is no turning back. Louise stands by the door, realizing there is no way to return the gift. Now, she decides that since things turned out this way, she should at least go and express her gratitude to Michael for the new clothes. Suddenly, a loud voice starts screaming for someone to get out. Louise gasps as she hears another voice begging for the lady to stop. She immediately recognizes the voice as Miriam Berg and wonders what is happening. The new maid assigned to Miriam is crying and banging on the door. She begs to be let in, crying that the head maid will fire her if she fails. Louise watches the girl, wondering what could have possibly happened to cause this much chaos. Louise walks up to the crying girl and asks if she is okay and what is going wrong. The maid turns around, looking relieved to see her, and stammers out Louise's name. The maid explains that Miriam refuses to take a bath, even though the head maid gave strict orders that it had to happen today. Suddenly, a massive crash echoes from inside the room, startling both of them. The maid panics, thinking Miriam must have broken a bottle. Louise knows she has to get inside and clean up the mess immediately before the girl accidentally gets hurt on the glass. Louise starts rolling up her sleeves and tells the maid to go change her clothes while she handles the situation herself. She is determined to get through to the girl and settle things. Louise knocks twice on the door. She calls out to Miriam, asking if something is wrong and if she can come inside to help. She wants to make sure the girl is safe. Miriam screams for her to stay out. Inside the bathroom, a bottle is shattered on the floor. Miriam is huddled in the tub, insisting she is not hurt and can bathe all by herself without any help. Louise speaks calmly through the door, agreeing that Miriam is a young lady and not a child. She explains she only wants to come in to clean up the glass shards so no one gets hurt. She even promises to tell the head maid that Miriam is capable of bathing herself. Louise adds that she will do this so the other maids won't bother her again. After a long silence, Miriam finally gives in and whispers for her to come in. The door creaks open as Louise slowly peeks into the bathroom. She calls out Miriam's name softly, trying not to startle her as she enters the room to check on her. Miriam is sitting in the bathtub, looking completely miserable. She is shivering in the water and tearfully stammers out Louise's name, clearly traumatized by whatever just happened. Louise kneels right next to the tub and looks at the girl with deep concern. She asks if she is really not hurt, and Miriam quietly insists that she is fine. Louise Henriette Ermolli notices that Miriam is trembling. She realizes the girl is shivering because the bathwater has gone cold while they were talking. Louise offers to run some hot water and asks if Miriam would like help washing her hair. Miriam flinches and stammers, clearly hesitant about the sudden offer of assistance. Louise smiles warmly and tells her not to worry. She explains that since her mother was ill for a long time, she always bathed her and can do it just as well as any maid. Miriam stares silently at Louise. Louise is surprised that the girl is staying still instead of refusing her help like she expected. Louise looks at Miriam with a soft expression. She thinks to herself that this must mean it is finally okay to proceed with the bath. As the water clears, Miriam's bare thighs are revealed to be covered in numerous severe, red, and unhealed scars and cuts. Louise's eyes widen in absolute horror at the sight. She wonders who on earth could have done this, noting that the scars are fresh and did not happen long ago. Louise remembers a maid crying in the hallway, explaining that Miriam did not want to bathe, but the head maid insisted it had to happen today. Louise connects the pieces in her mind. She realizes this trauma is exactly why Miriam has been avoiding baths all this time. Louise looks down with a furious expression. She thinks about how terrible it is to do this to a child who has not fully matured and declares she cannot forgive it. Louise gently dries Miriam's hair with a towel while they sit together in the quiet bathroom, trying to maintain a calm presence for the girl. Louise mentions she heard that scary teachers hit students on the thighs as punishment for reading incorrectly. Miriam looks completely shocked and terrified by the statement. Miriam asks if punishment means being stabbed with a needle. Louise is horrified and asks what she means, begging her not to say such a thing. Louise asks Miriam directly if Miss Zara used to punish her by stabbing her with a needle, her voice filled with concern. Miriam begins to cry and tremble. She stammers an apology to Louise, promising that she will do better from now on to avoid further pain. Miriam begs Louise not to use the needle and promises she won't be an embarrassment. Louise reaches out and holds the girl's hands to comfort her. Miriam pleads with Louise not to sell her to the merchants heading to Sade. Louise cries as she finally understands the full extent of the girl's fear. Louise realizes that Miriam's dislike of studying and her aversion to bathing are all just byproducts of the horrific abuse she suffered. Louise pulls Miriam into a tight hug. She tells the girl to stop saying such things and tries to soothe her through the breakdown. Louise continues to hold Miriam while she cries. She promises the girl that even if she reads incorrectly, she will never, ever punish her. Louise Henriette Ermolli pulls Miriam into a tight hug, promising that she will never hurt the girl or send her away anywhere. She is determined to provide the safety the child has been denied for so long. Miriam looks up and asks if she really promises. Louise holds her hands firmly and confirms that she does, giving the girl her word that things will be different from now on. Miriam continues to cry, letting out a soft sniffle as the weight of her trauma finally begins to surface in the safety of her new teacher's presence. Louise stays on her knees in the bathroom, holding the girl close to provide the comfort she has clearly been missing. She knows this is only the beginning of a very difficult journey. Outside, the Berg estate sits under the dark night sky, hiding the secrets that have been happening within its walls. The massive castle looks peaceful, but the reality inside is much darker. Walking down the quiet hallway later that night, Louise thinks about how she cried so much earlier that she can barely keep her eyes open. The emotional toll of Miriam's revelation is starting to hit her. She realizes that even though the abuse happened before she arrived at the estate, she absolutely has to hold the teacher who harmed Miriam accountable. She cannot let this go unpunished. She remembers asking Miriam earlier if she could explain what Miss Zara used to punish her, telling the girl she did not have to speak if it was too distressing for her to remember. Miriam slowly opens a vanity drawer and reveals the truth, stammering that the previous governess used to stab her with the object hidden inside. Louise is completely shocked as she looks at the long needle, realizing the cruelty Miriam had to endure. It is a horrifying piece of evidence that confirms her worst fears. She asks the girl who else knows that the teacher was hurting her, and Miriam reveals that only Miss Zara and a maid named Niel were aware of what was happening. Miriam explains that Niel was her personal maid, but the teacher took her away when she left. Louise immediately realizes that Zara took the maid to cover her tracks and eliminate any witnesses. She finds it hard to believe that the previous teacher thought taking just one maid would be enough to destroy all the evidence of her crimes. Zara was clearly desperate to hide the truth. Louise wonders if it is possible that no one else in the entire mansion knew about the abuse, especially if the punishments had been going on for a long time right under their noses. She recalls head butler Martin explaining that the previous teacher supposedly fell ill and returned home, which is why they had to post a public advertisement for an outsider like her. The more she thinks about it, the more the story about the teacher quitting due to illness bothers her. She decides to take action and knocks on a heavy door, ready to confront the master of the house. Margrave Michael Berg tells her to come in from inside. Louise gulps nervously, realizing this is her very first time entering his private bedroom at such an hour. She steps inside and apologizes for the late hour, but insists that she has something extremely urgent that they need to discuss right now. She is not leaving until she gets answers. Margrave Michael Berg sits in his chair with a book and a cigar. He welcomes Louise Henriette Ermolli, telling her how fortunate it is that she has come to see him at such a late hour. Michael taps his cigar on the ashtray and mentions he heard she changed her clothes. He admits he was just wondering about the reason for her sudden change in appearance. Michael smiles and tells her it seems he finally found something to her taste. He notes that the new outfit suits her quite well. Louise admits she thought he disliked her morning attire. She then thanks him for the concern he showed regarding her mother's funeral arrangements. Michael asks if she will hold the funeral in Berg since she is so grateful. Louise declines, stating her plan to lay her mother to rest in the Melk Parish ossuary instead. He asks if she will allow him to visit Melk again next week. He then points out that it does not seem like she came to accept his marriage proposal today either. Louise reveals she actually came to ask about the previous governess. She asks if it is certain that the woman returned home due to illness, as she had heard from the other staff. Michael questions why she feels the need to ask such a question at this time. Louise hesitates for a moment, clearly unsure of how to proceed with the conversation. Louise explains that she found evidence the teacher abused Miriam. She admits she wondered if he was aware of it, which is why she came to his room so late despite the impropriety. Michael looks at her with a surprised expression and simply repeats the word abuse. He seems taken aback by the serious accusation she is making against the former staff member. Louise confirms the abuse, explaining that the teacher stabbed Miriam's thigh with a knitting needle as punishment during class. She adds that the girl still has scars. Michael claims he had no idea such a thing could happen. Michael notes that Miriam is intimidated by him, which makes it difficult for him to observe her closely. He thanks Louise for letting him know and promises to handle the situation himself. Louise wonders if he really knew nothing and thinks about how he did not even bother to ask how badly his own sister was actually injured during the abuse. Michael reaches out and touches a lock of her hair. Louise thinks she is an idiot for almost wavering because of a man like him. She brings up his plan to visit Melk next week to change the subject. Michael steps closer to her and offers to assign some people to accompany her on the trip to Melk. He seems determined to keep a close eye on her movements. He continues holding her hair and looking down at her, suggesting that he could even escort her to the parish himself. The offer feels more like a command than a choice. Louise pulls her hair away, telling him that his offer is far too generous. She says she is truly grateful for his consideration, but tries to maintain her distance from him. Michael leans in close to her face and suggests she accept a defeat out of gratitude. He says he is good at waiting, but since they are alone in the room, he does not think he can hold back this time. Louise thinks to herself that she needs to stop here, but she feels like she cannot refuse him. Michael's face is reflected in her wide eyes as the tension between them peaks. A sudden knock at the door interrupts the tense moment, leaving Louise looking completely startled. The unexpected sound breaks the predatory hold Michael had over her. Michael pulls away, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Louise is left standing there, Louise's face burning from the tension that was just broken. He clicks his tongue and asks what it is, his voice sharp with irritation. The heavy door creaks open just enough for a voice to filter through. Martin apologizes to his master and identifies himself, sounding hesitant to disturb us at such a moment. Martin holds out a sealed envelope, his eyes fixed on Michael. He says he's come with an urgent message, and the weight of the situation is clear in his tone. Louise slip out and pull the door shut behind me with a soft thud. Louise needs to get as far away from Michael as possible before Louise's heart stops racing. Back inside, Michael lets out a long, frustrated sigh. He runs a hand through his hair, trying to shake off the lingering heat from the encounter. He mutters Martin's name as he slides his hand down. Martin bows slightly, presenting the letter again. He apologizes and explains that Viscount Engel urgently asked him to deliver this to him as soon as possible. Michael glares at the envelope, his eyes narrowing. He grunts in confusion, clearly not in the mood for whatever political nonsense Engel is sending his way. Michael turns his back on Martin, completely dismissive. He asks why he should care if Viscount Engel is in a hurry and wonders who he is anyway. Martin stammers that Sebastian is the Lord of Melk, the land close to the Berg territory. Michael cuts him off, calling Martin by name. He says he has more urgent matters than some scrap of paper. Martin is confused, but Michael tells him that once he hears it, he won't care about that paper either. Michael lets out a sigh. He says the new teacher is quite commendable. Finally acknowledging the work Louise has been doing with Miriam, Michael drops the bombshell, saying she found evidence that the previous teacher abused Miriam. The news hits Martin like a physical blow. Martin whispers the words in disbelief, asking if Lady Miriam was really abused. His hand trembles as he clutches the letter. While the head maid might not care, Martin has always pitied and cared for the girl. Michael asks if that teacher returned to her hometown, Krems. Martin gets the message immediately. He says he will look into it, master. Martin bows deeply, his face set in a rough mask. He says he'll be going now, ready to carry out whatever dark orders are coming next. Michael asks for a favor on Martin's way back. He wants the wolves at the entrance to the hunting grounds released into the mountains. Martin is shocked by the sudden order and asks if he really means it right now. A few days later, the estate is quiet. Louise looks at Louise's wages, thinking Louise has saved money faster than Louise thought. Louise has been so focused on teaching Miriam lately that the days are just blurring together. Louise can't help but think about that man. Louise haven't seen Michael recently since he's been out hunting all the time, which is honestly a bit of a relief after everything. Louise peeks into the room, wondering if Michael is still not back yet. After everything that has happened, Louise finds myself looking for the very man Louise was trying to avoid. Michael is sitting at his desk, looking over documents with a cigar in hand. When Louise enters, he immediately puts it out, telling her that if he had known she was coming, he never would have lit it in the first place. Michael gets straight to the point, asking if he can hope she has come today to finally answer his marriage proposal. Louise flinches at the question, telling him that people might seriously misunderstand if they heard him say things like that. Michael just smirks at her reaction. What if that is exactly what Louise wants? He asks, clearly enjoying how much he can rattle her with just a few words. Louise is completely caught off guard by his boldness. Louise can feel Louise's face turning bright red as Louise stares back at him, unable to find a quick comeback. She quickly turns away, trying to hide her embarrassment. Your jokes go too far, she tells him, desperate to change the subject before things get even more awkward. Michael doesn't seem bothered by her protest. He notes that since she came all the way to his office, she must have some free time on her hands today. He suggests that they take a walk together. Louise is stunned by the sudden invitation, her eyes going wide as she tries to process why he would want to go for a stroll right now. She tries to make a quick excuse, telling him it is fine, but she should probably stop by her room to get her coat first. Louise is just looking for any reason to get a moment of breathing room. Michael isn't letting her get away that easily. He drapes his own heavy coat over her shoulders, telling her that his is warmer anyway, and they should just go as they are. The two of them head out into the snowy woods surrounding the estate. Suddenly, a loud squawk echoes through the trees, making Louise jump in surprise as she looks around for the source. They come across a peacock and a turkey just standing there in the middle of the winter landscape. Louise is amazed, thinking to herself that these birds are absolutely massive. Michael explains that these are birds he captured alive while he was out hunting. Louise is bewildered by this, asking if he actually captures animals alive too, given his usual reputation for being a ruthless hunter. Michael tells her he knows what she is thinking, But he doesn't always go hunting with a gun. He points out that birds like these actually become much more valuable food when they are captured alive. He asks her if this hobby doesn't suit him, or if she thinks it isn't a fitting pastime for a margrave. He seems genuinely curious about her opinion of him. Louise can't help but let out a genuine laugh. The idea of this intimidating man carefully catching peacocks in the woods is just too much for her to stay serious. She tells him it isn't that it doesn't suit him, it is just very different from what she had imagined. Michael responds by telling her that he really isn't as bad a man as she seems to think. Michael reaches out his hand toward her, warning her that the path is about to get rough from here. He tells her to take his hand so she doesn't lose her footing in the snow. Louise stares at his hand, feeling the weight of the gesture. Louise hesitates for a moment, realizing that taking his hand feels like accepting more than just help with a walk. She finally reaches out and places her hand in his. As our fingers lock, she lets him lead her further into the quiet, snowy forest. Louise Henriette Ermolli can feel her face heating up as she walks beside the margrave. She is completely flushed after their recent conversation, unable to hide how much his presence is starting to affect her. The two of them continue their trek through the deep snow, their footsteps crunching rhythmically against the frozen ground. Louise stays close to Margrave Michael as he leads the way through the quiet forest. They move past the frost-covered branches, the silence of the woods only broken by the sound of their steady pace. Every step further into the estate grounds feels like they are moving into a more private world. Michael asks if she remembers when the pawnshop owner stole her promissory note. He admits that after hearing about it, he became concerned about the security of her home. He reveals that he actually put in a word with the police station overseeing her area. Louise wonders if he is about to bring up his marriage proposal again. Michael continues walking, explaining that he received a specific report about what happened at her house while she was away. Louise stops and asks him exactly what happened while she was gone, her anxiety clearly rising. Michael bluntly informs her that her house was broken into again. Louise is completely startled by the news, her eyes widening as she tries to process that her home has been targeted once more. Michael asks if she has made any enemies, noting that the intruders completely destroyed the place. Louise insists that cannot be right because she has never made any enemies in her life. Michael turns back toward her, explaining that he only used his authority because the matter concerns her. He admits that under any other normal circumstances, he would not have bothered to interfere with local police matters. He mentions the inspector was quite concerned and increased patrols until they finally caught the thief who broke into her house. Louise realizes that Michael really went out of his way just to help her. Michael leans in close, his gaze intense, as he notes that he has ultimately been very helpful to her. He playfully asks if she is finally going to praise him for his efforts. Louise gives a respectful bow, sincerely thanking him for his concern. She acknowledges his help with the formal respect due to his position as the Margrave. Michael says he will send someone to assess the damage to her house. Louise whips around in surprise, telling him she can just go and clean up the mess herself without bothering him further. Michael turns his back on her, stating that he would benefit much more from having her indebted to him. He abruptly announces he is leaving Louise standing there looking stunned by his cold logic. As night falls over the estate, the wind picks up, blowing leaves through the dark air. The quiet of the evening settles over the grounds after their tense walk. Later that night at the Berg estate, Louise sits at her vanity mirror, lost in thought. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door startles her out of her reflection. Louise opens the door to find the head butler, Martin, standing there. She asks what brings him by, and he explains it is nothing serious, but there is a letter for her. Louise thanks him as she takes the envelope. After closing the door, Louise stares at the letter in her hands. She thinks to herself that she cannot imagine anyone who would be sending her mail and wonders who it could possibly be from. Louise flinches as she looks closer at the envelope. Her heart sinks when she sees the name on the back. Realizing the letter is from Sebastian Bernd de Engel, Louise Henriette Ermolli rips open the letter, realizing it is from the Engel Viscounty where she used to work as a tutor. She wonders why they would send her a letter now. The message begins with an apology for the urgency, explaining that Pietro wanted to see her after all this time. The letter describes how Pietro stopped by her house briefly. However, the situation took a dark turn when the police suddenly burst into the building while he was there. Pietro was mistaken for a thief and arrested on the spot. Louise is absolutely horrified, her hand trembling as she drops the letter and falls to her knees. She realizes that the thief Margrave Michael claimed to have caught was actually her friend. Inside his private quarters, Michael sits in a large bathtub. As he moves, a large, jagged scar is visible across his bare back, a physical reminder of the harsh life he has lived. A sharp knock sounds at the bathroom door, interrupting his quiet moment. Michael tells the visitor to come in, and the heavy door begins to creak open. Louise pushes the door open and steps inside, unaware of exactly what she is walking into. Louise apologizes for the late hour and explains she has an urgent matter to discuss, even though she knows it is improper to visit now. She accidentally steps into a puddle of water as Michael calls out her name in surprise. Louise looks down and sees Michael's bare feet stepping onto the floor right in front of her. The realization of the situation hits her, and she stands there looking completely shocked. Louise quickly turns her head away, her face turning red as she covers her mouth in embarrassment. She apologizes profusely, explaining she did not realize this was the bathroom and only entered because he told her to come in. Michael steps close behind her, still shirtless and dripping with water. He tells her he would not mind if she came closer, but warns that if she did, she probably would not be able to refuse his marriage proposal. Michael turns away to put on a white robe. He explains that since it is so late, he simply assumed it was his butler, Martin, coming to check on him. Michael finishes tying his robe and tells Louise she can turn around now that he is dressed. He glances at her and asks what could possibly bring her to his room at this hour. Louise turns back to face him, looking incredibly anxious. She admits that she has come to ask him for a favor. Michael looks slightly surprised by her request. He repeats her words, asking if she is really there to ask him for a favor. Louise explains she received word from Melk and believes there is a massive misunderstanding regarding the thief he mentioned. She insists the person arrested is not a criminal, but the son of Viscount Engel, her former employer. Michael asks if there is some law that says a Viscount's son is incapable of being a thief. Louise flinches as he steps even closer to her, the tension between them rising. Louise clenches her dress, insisting she can tell when someone has been wronged. She tells him the young master she knew was a kind and good man who must have been arrested while trying to help her. Louise places her hand over her heart and pleads with him. She tells Michael that Pietro would never do anything to harm her and begs him to release the man from custody. Michael turns his head away, his expression turning cold. He tells her that the more highly she speaks of this other man, the less he actually wants to help her. Margrave Michael glares coldly at Louise Henriette Ermolli, the tension in the room reaching a breaking point. He bluntly asks her how many more favors he has to grant before she finally accepts his marriage proposal. It is a calculated move, using her current desperation to force her hand. Louise is completely stunned by the bluntness of his question. Her face flushes with a mix of embarrassment and anxiety as the weight of the situation hits her. She realizes that her plea for help has just become a bargaining chip for his contract marriage. She clenches her fists tightly, looking down as she tries to process the ultimatum. The silence stretches between them. Heavy with the pressure Michael is exerting, she knows she is in a corner with no easy way out if she wants to save Pietro. Louise finally finds her voice, admitting that she understands being by his side is the only way she can truly plead for Pietro's release. She is acknowledging the reality of the power he holds over her and the man she is trying to protect. She stands her ground in front of the Margrave, insisting that the man arrested is a true citizen of the land who has been wrongfully accused. She is desperate for him to see the truth behind the arrest, regardless of his personal motives. Looking up with a desperate expression, she asks Michael to make the right judgment in his capacity as the leader of this land. She is appealing to his sense of duty, hoping that his role as a ruler will outweigh his desire to manipulate her. Michael lets out a heavy sigh, his expression softening just a bit as he watches her. He tells her she definitely has a way with words and admits that she is actually making his resolve weaken, though his gaze remains sharp. He turns his head away and finally gives in to her plea, saying he will send word to the Berg police regarding the matter. Louise looks visibly relieved, her shoulders dropping as the immediate threat to Pietro's safety seems to lessen. Louise bows deeply in gratitude, thanking him repeatedly for his help. She then asks if she can visit Melk to check on Pietro herself while the arrangements are being made, wanting to see with her own eyes that he is safe. She adds that she has finally saved enough money to enshrine her mother's ashes at the Melk Church, which was her mother's final wish. Michael seems surprised that she managed to save that much already, given her circumstances at the estate. Michael leans in close and grabs her arm, catching her off guard with a sudden suggestion. He asks how she would feel about traveling to Melk together. Louise is stunned by the proposal and can only manage to ask pardon. He explains that his direct involvement with the police would be a huge help in getting the young man exonerated quickly. Louise realizes that if Caius accompanies her, Pietro will be released without any issues, but she is still wary of his intentions. She turns away, feeling conflicted about the offer. She mentions how busy he must be as the Margrave, but internally she wonders if it is really okay to keep relying on this man who is so determined to marry her. Michael looks her in the eye and admits that he is indeed busy. However, he tells her he does not want to miss a single opportunity to earn major points with her, making it clear that his help comes with a price. He pats her on the shoulder as he walks past, taking charge of the situation. He tells her he will contact the church about enshrining the ashes in advance so they can go together, effectively making the trip a joint venture. His bare feet step across the floor as he leaves her standing there alone. The sound of his footsteps echoes in the room, marking the end of their conversation and the beginning of a new forced partnership. Louise can only whisper a quiet thank you to His Excellency as he departs. She is left standing in the middle of his room, her mind racing with the implications of their upcoming journey to Melk. The next day arrives at the Melk Regional Church. A black carriage bearing the Berg estate crest pulls up outside the massive stone building, drawing the attention of everyone nearby as the Margrave's arrival is announced. Michael personally helps Louise step down from the carriage with a formal gesture. She clutches the white urn containing her mother's ashes tightly, finally ready to fulfill her mother's dying wish in the very place she once called home. The priest greets Louise Henriette Ermolli, mentioning that he heard the news. He asks if she is here to enshrine her mother's ashes. Louise confirms and hands over the white circular box, asking the priest to please take care of it, holding the box. The priest reassures her that her mother will now continue her spiritual life in paradise. Michael approaches Louise with a bouquet of white lilies, telling her that these are flowers to give to her mother. Louise is touched and thanks His Excellency for the gesture. As they walk together, Michael asks Louise what kind of person her mother actually was. Louise describes her mother as a good person who was strict, but also had many girlish qualities. Michael listens silently, clenching his jaw as he processes her words. Louise thanks Michael for coming all this way with her, showing her gratitude for his support during the enshrinement. Michael tells her that the truly grateful part is yet to come. He reminds her that they still need to save that young man, Pietro. Louise agrees, stating that she simply cannot let an innocent person suffer because of her. Michael leads the way, suggesting that they head straight to the police station to handle the matter. Inside the station, the police inspector bows to Michael, apologizing for having His Excellency come to such a humble place. He mentions that he has heard much about him from the chief inspector. Michael says he is pleased to meet him, but notes that there seems to have been a slight misunderstanding in the process of handling the matter he requested before. The inspector panics, begging him not to say that and promising to correct any mistakes immediately. Michael realizes that being with a person of his status makes even difficult things easy to resolve. Michael leans in and asks the inspector about the son of Viscount Engel, bringing up Pietro's situation directly. The inspector nervously confirms that the young man is in the detention center. Michael says he would like to see how he is doing, so the inspector immediately offers to lead the way. As they walk, the inspector tries to explain the situation so Louise doesn't misunderstand. He claims Pietro was arrested because someone witnessed him trespassing and rummaging through her empty residence. Louise interrupts, telling the inspector that there isn't anything worth stealing in her house. She insists that no one, especially the young lord, would ever want to rob her home. The inspector offers his apologies to Louise and opens the creaking cell door, telling her to go on in. Louise steps into the cell and gasps in absolute shock at what she sees waiting for her inside. Louise cries out for Pietro, who is sitting on the floor with his arms tied tightly behind his back. Pietro looks up in surprise, asking what she is doing there. Outside the police station, Lord Pietro Engel stands with Margrave Michael and Louise Henriette Ermolli. Pietro mentions he heard Louise went to Berg, likely surprised to see her in the company of the Margrave after everything that has happened. Pietro bows respectfully and thanks Michael once again for his help in resolving the situation. Michael dismisses the gratitude, telling him not to mention it, acting as if freeing a noble from jail was a minor favor. Pietro turns to Louise to explain himself, saying the only reason he went to her house was because he heard a thief broke in and wanted to check on her property. Louise tells him she never imagined he had any other intention, trusting his friendship. Michael cuts in with a cold stare, declaring that Louise is now under his care. He bluntly tells Pietro that he will be handling all of her matters himself, from now on. Pietro is stunned and can only manage to ask for a pardon, clearly confused by the sudden claim of authority. Michael adds that he has already sent carpenters to fix up her place, making it clear Pietro's help is no longer needed. Pietro flinches, realizing Michael has completely sidelined him and taken full control of Louise's life. Louise tells Pietro that things just ended up this way and asks him to give her regards to the Viscount and the young ladies. Pietro is left standing there in shock, wondering what on earth is actually going on with her. As a black carriage waits on the cobblestone street, Pietro announces that they will be taking their leave, signaling the end of their brief and tense reunion. Pietro is left standing alone on the street as the carriage departs, watching Louise be whisked away by the powerful Margrave. The carriage travels down the road, the sound of horses' hooves echoing against the pavement as Michael and Louise head toward their next destination. Inside the carriage, Louise sits in a heavy silence. Michael steals a glance at her, observing her reaction to his possessive display at the station. Michael sits with his arms crossed and mentions he is glad the matter regarding Pietro was resolved more easily than he had expected, satisfied with how thoroughly he isolated her from her former allies. Louise looks out the carriage window with wide eyes, still processing the fact that Michael just claimed she was under his care in front of her old friend. The carriage comes to a stop in front of a shop called Donedraw. Louise points it out, telling Michael that is the exact place where she saw the cat before. Michael touches his chin thoughtfully and asks if she wants to go inside and check if the cat is still there, using her fondness for animals to appear caring. Louise immediately nods her head, eager for a chance to see the animal again and momentarily forgetting her tension. Michael gives the order to stop the carriage right in front of the shop so they can investigate. Louise looks around the shop in confusion, wondering where the cat went since it was right there before. She asks where it could have gone. Louise looks visibly disappointed when she cannot find the cat. Michael let out a sigh as he stands behind her, watching her search. The shopkeeper rushes into the room in a panic, asking what brings the Margrave to his humble shop. Michael tells him not to ask what he needs, but to ask Louise instead. Louise Henriette Ermolli asks if there was a cat there. The shopkeeper bows to her and Margrave Michael Berg, asking if she means Marie and why she is looking for her. Michael explains that someone he knows likes cats and he wanted to come see it with them. The shopkeeper leads them over to where she is. Marie the cat is sleeping in a basket surrounded by flowers. Louise gently strokes the cat and asks if she is always there. The shopkeeper smiles and tells her she can feel free to come see the cat anytime. Louise smiles and says thank you while Michael watches her. Michael slides his hand toward her and tells her she has a habit of only saying thank you without taking action. He says, when you are grateful to a merchant, you should buy something, and asks, how about this? Michael holds up a fabric and says, let him buy her one. Louise is surprised and says, that seems too extravagant. She tells him she is fine. Michael insists, asking what kind of lord enters a shop and leaves empty-handed. He tells her not to be like that and to pick something, noting she will need it when she takes off her mourning clothes. Michael grins and notes that it seems she did not like the fur he had custom made for her. Louise tells him not at all, and that she never thought of his gift that way. She says it would be an honor to receive a gift. Michael sighs and tells her it seems she is getting better and better at handling people. Michael suggests some gloves, pointing out that Berg is cold, so they will be useful for her. Louise is startled and says she is not used to buying things like this. The shopkeeper chatters, explaining that they are lambskin gloves that keep hands very warm. He adds that they will surely suit a lady. A hairband and a scrunchie are sitting on the counter. Michael touches his chin and asks if that is just it. Louise is startled by the question. Louise turns her head away and says, even this is more than she deserves. Michael stands in the shop. Michael calls out her name, Louise, and she turns her head back toward him. Louise Henriette Ermolli turns around as her dress rustles. She looks completely surprised and lets out a small gasp of, oh, Louise. Michael reaches out to adjust the collar of her dress. The shopkeeper smiles and gestures toward them, remarking that she is so beautiful that if she stays like that, their hats will sell like hotcakes. Michael simply grins in response to the shopkeeper. He says that would be troublesome. Louise flushes a deep red and looks away from him. Michael tells the shopkeeper that he needs this person at his estate. Michael then gives his final order, telling the man to give him the hairband and the hat. The shopkeeper bows deeply and confirms the order with a loud yes. Michael looks at Louise and asks if she is planning to come with Miriam. He informs her that he will send a carriage to pick them up in 3 days. Louise looks down at her black dress with a complicated expression. Michael asks if there is a problem. She admits that this is different from the promise she made with her nanny. Michael stands near her and notes that it is getting colder. So 3 days from now should be fine. He adds that Lady Miriam will probably be happy about the arrangement too. Louise bows respectfully to the Margrave. She tells him, thank you, Your Excellency. Michael stands quietly in his suit and vest as the interaction settles. Suddenly, Michael breaks the silence by saying the name, Caius. Louise looks up in total surprise at the sudden use of his first name. She can only manage to ask yes in response. Michael looks down at her and remarks that it seems she has forgotten that he has a name too. Louise looks nervous and hesitant about the breach in etiquette. She stammers that she would not dare call him that. Michael asks if her thanks to him today were just empty words. While the shopkeeper packs their items behind the counter, Michael continues his pressure. He tells her she cannot even grant him one simple request. Louise touches her lip and looks deeply conflicted about what to do. She lets out a thoughtful as she considers his demand. Finally, Louise gives in to his request. She looks at him and says, "Thank you, Lord Caius." Michael looks at her with a softened and pleased expression. He tells her to take her time. He finishes his thought as the scene fades out. He tells her that he is a patient person. Margrave Michael leans in and kisses the back of Louise Ermolli's hand, leaving her completely flustered. After pressuring her into calling him by his first name, he uses this intimate gesture to further break down her boundaries. He reminds her that he is a patient person, making it clear he is willing to wait as long as it takes.